That morning in November, standing in the hallway of St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto, I was absolutely certain I was doing the right thing. I had driven 3 hours from Kingston in the dark, through freezing rain on the 401, because my daughter had called me sobbing at 2 in the morning. "Mom, it's Aunt Carol, you need to come. They're saying she might not make it." I had thrown on my coat over my pajamas, grabbed my purse, and left before the coffee even finished brewing. Carol, my little sister. 61 years old and lying in a hospital bed because she had fallen down the stairs in her own home. That's what her husband had told everyone. A fall. She had gotten up in the night, lost her footing at the top of the staircase, and that was that. Traumatic brain injury. The doctors were not optimistic. Have you ever been handed a decision that no human being should have to make? That's where I was that morning. Standing in a corridor that smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee, still wearing the coat I'd grabbed in the dark, waiting for a doctor to walk me through paperwork that would determine whether my sister lived or died. Carol's husband, Martin, had been at the hospital since the night before. He was the one who called 911. He was the one who rode in the ambulance. By the time I arrived, he had already spoken with 2 doctors, the social worker and the hospital's legal coordinator. He seemed very organized for a man whose wife was upstairs unconscious. "Margaret," he said when he saw me, opening his arms like we were meeting at a dinner party. "I'm so glad you're here. This is so hard." I let him hug me, but something in my chest pulled tight. Martin and I had never been close. He and Carol had been married for 14 years, and in all that time I had never fully trusted him. I couldn't explain it. My daughter called it my mother radar. My late husband used to say I had a nose for nonsense. I just knew that Martin smiled a little too smoothly, and listened a little too carefully, and always seemed to be calculating something just behind his eyes. But Carol loved him, and Carol was the one lying upstairs. So I swallowed my feelings and I followed him to the consultation room. The doctor, a quiet man named Dr. Anand, explained the situation carefully. Carol had sustained a severe traumatic brain injury. The swelling was significant. There had been no meaningful brain activity in over 36 hours. They had run every test twice. In his professional opinion, and in the opinion of a second consulting neurologist, Carol was not going to recover. He placed a folder on the table in front of us. He explained that given the prognosis, the family could choose to transition Carol to comfort care, which would mean removing the ventilator and allowing a natural death. The process required the signature of her next of kin, or, if she had designated a substitute decision-maker in a power of attorney for personal care, that person's signature would take precedence. Martin slid a document across the table toward me before Dr. Anand had even finished speaking. "Carol named me as her substitute decision-maker," he said. "I've already signed. They just need a family witness. One signature, Margaret, that's all." I looked down at the papers. There were several pages, stapled at the corner. Martin had already signed on the last page. There was one line left, marked with a small yellow sticker that said "Witness." Dr. Anand handed me a pen. I reached for it. "Excuse me." The voice came from behind me. Quiet, but firm. I turned around. Standing in the doorway of the consultation room was a young woman in scrubs. She looked about 30, with dark hair pulled back tightly, and the kind of expression that told you she had rehearsed what she was about to say several times on the walkover. She was holding a tablet against her chest like a shield. "I'm so sorry to interrupt," she said. "I'm Rebecca Chen. I'm one of the registered nurses on the ICU floor. Mrs. Whitmore is my patient." She looked at me directly, not at Martin. "Could I speak with you for just a moment? Privately?" Martin's smile did not waver. "I don't think that's appropriate right now. We're in the middle of—" "It'll only take a moment," Rebecca said, still looking at me. Her voice was steady, but her hands were gripping the tablet just a little too hard. "Please." I don't know why I stood up. Maybe it was my mother radar. Maybe it was the look in that young woman's eyes, which was not the polite professional concern I would have expected. It was something else. It was fear. I excused myself and followed her into the hallway. She pulled me around a corner, away from the consultation room door, and then she spoke very quietly and very quickly. "Mrs. Whitmore, I need you to know something before you sign anything. I've been Carol's primary nurse for the past 2 days. I've been with her every shift." She paused. "Yesterday evening, I was reviewing her intake notes, the full file, not just the nursing handover, and I noticed something about the timeline that didn't sit right with me. I told her to go on. The paramedics noted when they arrived that Carol's core body temperature was lower than you would expect for someone who had just fallen. Not dramatically low, but lower. And there was bruising on her upper arms that the attending ER doctor noted as consistent with gripping, being held, not with falling. She swallowed. I flagged it with my charge nurse, but she said the attending had already reviewed it and determined it was inconclusive. I stared at her. I also looked at the visitor log, Rebecca said. Martin left the hospital last night at around 9 o'clock. He came back at 11:30. I know that doesn't mean anything on its own, but I've been doing this for 6 years, and I've sat with a lot of patients, and I've sat with a lot of families, and something about the way he behaves around her is, she stopped herself. I'm not making an accusation. I just don't think you should sign those papers until someone has taken a closer look. I felt something drop in my stomach, a cold, heavy thing. What would a closer look mean? I asked. It would mean requesting a formal review by the patient advocate. It would mean asking the hospital's ethics board to weigh in before any decision is finalized. In Ontario, that process exists exactly for situations like this. It's your right to ask for it. As her sister, even if you're not the substitute decision-maker, you have standing to request that review. She looked at me steadily. Martin cannot finalize anything until that process is complete. I asked her if she understood what she was suggesting, that she was a nurse talking about another patient's husband, that if she was wrong, this could go very badly for her. She didn't flinch. I know exactly what I'm doing, she said. And I know I might be wrong, but if I'm right and I stay quiet, then I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life. She looked down the hallway toward Carol's room. She's my patient. I went back into the consultation room. I put the pen down on the table. I told Martin and Dr. Anand that I was not going to sign anything today. I told them I wanted to request a review by the patient advocate and the hospital ethics committee before any decisions were finalized. I said it as calmly as I could, though my hands were trembling inside my coat pockets. Martin's smile finally slipped. Margaret? His voice dropped. This is not the time for this. Carol is gone. The doctors have told us that. Every hour she's on that machine is what? I asked him. He stopped. What is every hour costing, Martin? He looked at me for a long moment, and something passed through his face that I had never seen before. It was there and gone in an instant. But I saw it. It was calculation. Pure and cold. I just want this to be over for her, he said quietly. She wouldn't want to suffer. Then a few more days won't hurt, I said. The patient advocate, a woman named Sandra, was at my side within 2 hours. She walked me through my rights under Ontario's Healthcare Consent Act clearly and without judgment. She explained that where there is any dispute or concern about a substitute decision-maker acting in the patient's best interests, the process could be paused and referred to the Consent and Capacity Board. That this was not unusual. That this was exactly what the system was built for, Martin argued. He called his own lawyer. He was very loud in the corridor for about 20 minutes. Then his lawyer apparently told him something that made him quiet down, because he went and sat in the family lounge and did not come back out. On the second day, a detective from the Toronto Police Service arrived at the hospital. Rebecca had, after consulting with the charge nurse and the unit manager, filed a formal concern with the hospital's risk management team. The risk management team had contacted the police, not an accusation. A concern, a request for someone with more authority than a nurse to take a look. The detective's name was Singh. She was calm and thorough, and she asked to speak with me for a long time. She asked about Carol and Martin's marriage, about finances, about whether Carol had any life insurance. I told her Carol had mentioned something the previous summer during one of our Sunday phone calls that I hadn't thought much of at the time. She had said, laughing a little uncomfortably, that she and Martin had been arguing about money, that she had recently discovered he had borrowed against the equity in their house without telling her, that they had a significant amount of debt she hadn't known about. I told Detective Singh that Carol had also told me, very quietly, near the end of that same phone call, that she had made an appointment with a family lawyer, that she was thinking about what her options were, that she hadn't wanted to say the word out loud yet. Detective Singh wrote all of this down. On the third day, they executed a search warrant for Martin's phone. I don't know all of what they found. I know some of it because it eventually came out in court, and because my daughter read every news article about the case and summarized them for me, which I'm not sure I'm grateful for. But what I know is this. Martin had a girlfriend. He had been seeing her for 2 years. Her name was not relevant to me, but the text messages between them were relevant to the police. Specifically the ones from the week before Carol's fall, in which Martin had discussed what would happen once Carol was gone, and what they could do with the life insurance payout, and how they would finally be free. Carol had 2 life insurance policies. Together they were worth $1.4 million. The search of their home turned up something else. Carol had a Ring doorbell camera and a Nest indoor camera that she had installed herself the previous spring after a package had been stolen from their porch. The indoor camera covered the front entrance and the bottom of the staircase. The footage auto-uploaded to a cloud account linked to Carol's personal email. Martin had apparently not known the camera was there or not known about the cloud backup because he hadn't thought to delete it. The footage from the night of Carol's fall showed Martin at the top of the stairs at 2:14 inches the morning. It showed Carol. It showed what happened between them. I have never watched that footage. I have no desire to. The detective described it to me in general terms because she felt I deserved to understand what had happened to my sister, and I told her that was enough. Martin was arrested on a Tuesday. The girlfriend was arrested 2 days later, when evidence emerged from the phone records that she had known what was planned and had said nothing. Martin was charged with attempted murder. His lawyer entered a not guilty plea, but by all accounts the case against him was overwhelming. And Carol? Carol did not die. On the 5th day after I refused to sign, she moved her left hand. A small movement, barely perceptible, but Rebecca saw it and immediately called the attending physician. A new neurological assessment was ordered. Another consulting team was brought in from the Kremble Brain Institute. The injury was severe, and the road ahead would be long and difficult and uncertain. But there was activity. There was something the first set of tests had not captured, possibly because of timing, possibly because of a medication Martin had given her the night before her fall, a sedative that had still been in her system when she arrived at the hospital and had complicated the initial neurological picture. That detail came out later. It is part of the criminal file. Carol spent 4 months at the hospital and then transferred to a rehabilitation center in Mississauga. I drove down every weekend. My daughter drove down on Wednesdays. Carol's friends from her book club organized a schedule of visits so that she was never alone on the days we couldn't be there. She relearned how to walk in February. She called me on the phone in March with her own voice, a little slower than before but unmistakably hers, and said, "I hear you caused quite a scene at St. Michael's." I told her she had no idea. She laughed. It was the most beautiful sound I have ever heard in my life. The trial took place the following autumn. I testified. It was one of the hardest things I have ever done, sitting in that courtroom and speaking clearly about my sister's marriage and what I had seen in Martin's face when I put that pen down. But I did it. Carol was not well enough to testify in person, but her video statement was played for the jury, and I watched the faces of 12 strangers hear my sister's voice describing her own marriage, and I watched them understand. Martin was convicted. The girlfriend pleaded guilty to a lesser charge in exchange for her cooperation and received a conditional sentence. Martin received 14 years. Rebecca Chen was nominated for a hospital recognition award that year. She didn't win it, actually hospital awards being what they are, but her colleagues decorated her locker and left a card that apparently made her cry in the break room, which I only know because she told me about it later, at coffee, because we have had coffee several times since all of this. She told me she had been afraid, that morning in the hallway, that she'd gone back and forth all night on whether to say anything, that she'd half convinced herself she was wrong, that she was reading too much into numbers on a chart, that she was going to embarrass herself and possibly lose her job over a hunch. I told her that the 10 seconds of courage she managed to find in that hallway had given my sister her life back. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think about all the times something feels wrong and nobody says anything. I think that's actually the more common outcome. I think about that a lot. Carol is doing well now. She walks with a cane some days, and she gets tired more easily than she used to, and there are things she still can't do that she could before. But she is here. She came to my granddaughter's birthday party last month and sat in the garden and ate 2 pieces of chocolate cake and complained that the icing was too sweet, and I thought I might burst from the ordinary, unremarkable joy of it. She sold the house in the spring. She's renting a condo near the waterfront in Hamilton, with big windows and a view of the lake, and she calls it her fresh start. She volunteers with a support group for survivors of domestic abuse, which she started doing quietly, and then gradually more and more, and when I told her I was proud of her, she waved her hand and said she's just doing something useful while her knee is too stiff for hiking. She is my sister. She is the most stubborn person I have ever loved. There are people who would look at this story and say I was lucky, that the right nurse happened to be on shift, that the camera happened to be there, that I happened to pause before picking up the pen. Maybe, but I also think about all the decisions that led to that moment. Carol choosing to install that camera herself, in the spring, because a package went missing, that small, unrelated act that ended up saving her life. Rebecca spending her evenings reviewing intake files that were technically not her responsibility to review because she couldn't let it go. My daughter calling me at 2 in the morning instead of waiting until a reasonable hour because she knew I would want to know right away. A chain of ordinary choices that somehow added up to something that mattered enormously. If there is anything I have taken from all of this, it is that your instincts are telling you something, even when the room full of official-looking people and formal documents seems to be telling you otherwise. It is that the person with the least institutional power in the room sometimes has the clearest view of the truth, and it is that asking for more time, more process, more oversight is never the wrong call when a decision cannot be undone. Put the pen down, ask the question, make them wait. That is everything.